You're listening to the Valley Current.
Welcome into the Valley Current. We've been continuing our general weekly approach, and I so appreciate your time because you are definitely you have a combination of both the scientific and the legal mind. And you sent me a note to tell me that you know about law because you apparently went through a couple of court martials. Did I read that correctly?
That's right. I was a Philadelphia lawyer. What does that mean today? It had a meaning when I was called a Philadelphia lawyer.
Well, I think it still means someone that is quite logical and also can be very verbose, but I don't think you're verbose in terms of explaining a position, right?
I am a Philadelphian.
And you're from Philadelphia on top of everything else, right?
That's right.
But now you're living up north in Sea Ranch. And I have to ask you, because we're getting a lot of storms here. Are you getting a storm out there today?
Well, I wouldn't call it a storm. We've had several nice showers, which we desperately need. And storms are much stronger than what we experienced here last night and this morning.
Right. I mean, when you guys get a big storm, it really is typically a really big storm, right?
Yes, and it's very dramatic because I'm about 700 feet above sea level with a 180-degree panoramic view of the Pacific, so I can see the storms approaching, which is very dramatic and interesting to watch as they come closer and closer to shore.
Right. It's quite a unique area. I know you've been there for a while. I'm kind of curious before we get started, how did you choose that area? Because it is a few hours north of the Bay Area.
Well, it was by accident. When we were living in south of San Francisco, we were looking for a house to buy, and the San Francisco Bay Area was far too expensive, and especially because we wanted some land around our house. And it was accidental that we made this finding at Sea Ranch because we were invited to a party for the opening of an art exhibit by close friends of my wife's. And at that art exhibit held at a gallery at the Sea Ranch, we accidentally met a realtor who introduced us to this house, which we ultimately bought.
And it was probably like instantaneous, right? You walked in and you knew you had to have it?
Well, not really. By that time, we had looked at so many houses that my wife and I had an agreement that we wouldn't express any thoughts about the house we were looking at when in the presence of the realtor. So it was only after he left us that we decided a day or two after that we would make an offer, and it was based on later on the fact that we had the house was brand new, never lived in, had just been built by a couple from Hollywood, California, who had put the house up for sale when the wife discovered the husband had been seeing another woman. So we had this brand new house, and we had permission to stay there in our sleeping bags for a couple of nights to explore the entire house, including the blueprints that were made available to us. And it was on that basis of that 3 or 4 day sleeping bag experience living at the house that we decided to buy it, and we have 2 acres and a house that's now worth more than twice as much as we paid for.
Oh, way more than probably like 5 to 10 times.
No.
Maybe more. No?
It's just twice as much because the road to get here is a difficult road, which is not happily traveled by.
No, that's a good thing. That's an asset these days.
It is.
That's a positive thing.
That's what keeps this place so pristine.
Right. So let's talk for a second before we get to the subject. Philadelphia lawyer, according to the Wikipedia, is a term to describe a lawyer who knows the most detailed and minute points of law or is exceptionally competent. Its first known usage dates back to 1788, and they have a reference to 1788 to a early version of the Merriam-Webster dictionary. And then they also say in the 20th century it denotes, quote, the ultimate in crooked lawyers. So take your pick, I guess. I think the version would be the first version is the way I think of it and not the second version, but probably it has devolved to some degree.
Well, I wasn't a lawyer long enough to know how to become crooked.
Oh, it goes on to say that the Philadelphia-based colonial American lawyer Andrew Hamilton, a lawyer best known for the legal victory on behalf of printer and newspaper publisher John Peter Zenger, is believed to have inspired the Philadelphia lawyer term. His 1735 decision helped to establish that truth is a defense to the accusation of libel or slander. So that's the Wikipedia. Obviously, there are other definitions, but do you detect in the media these days a little bit of the other definition of Philadelphia lawyer, which is everyone's weighing in on what's wrong and who's wrong, and a lot of finger pointing? Is it the Chinese? Was this ultimately a bioterrorism act made in a lab, or did the lab? I don't know if you've been watching this stuff, but there's some belief that maybe the lab had a spill and the spill got outside the biohazard zone within the lab as opposed to the Wuhan market itself. There are all these conspiracy theories. I guess there'll be a movie made of all this, but I'm kind of curious, when you watch this news, what do you say to yourself as both a scientist and a Philadelphia lawyer?
Well, as a virologist for several decades,
Right.
the probability that that Wuhan virology lab either produced the COVID-19 virus or had it escape is too far-fetched to be believable. It's not possible to engineer that virus.
Well, that was one of the medical doctors, I think, or maybe a biologist, or maybe a virologist who was on TV. I think it was 60 Minutes last night, maybe it was something else, who said the genetic fingerprint was not something that appeared to have been man-made. It looked more like it had evolved from a series of other viruses.
That's correct. It's simply a mutation from prior forms of that virus. The likelihood that the conspiracy theories are a modern phenomena that surround virtually every truth. So I'm not surprised at the conspiracy theories, especially because our president is a supporter of conspiracy theories, unlike previous presidents. And so he has influenced the naive citizens of our country to believe the conspiracy theories that he utters, which is not only tragic, but dangerous.
Right. So when you look at like the big topic of when will people feel comfortable going back to work, I'm getting a lot of calls from many clients saying our employees just want to work from home. They don't even want to go to a building where there are other people or be in an elevator to like the 15th floor. And imagine in New York, the 75th floor, where people could be coughing or sneezing or just blowing their nose, right? I mean, there are some risks there, right?
Well, the people who advocate staying at home and working and avoiding close contact to other individuals are smart and will survive. I'm a believer in the Darwinian principle of the survival of the fittest. And I hope that the ones who are not fit and who do not obey the rules that have been widely advertised will succumb to this virus, leaving those who live to be the fittest. and I find some poetic justice in that observation.
Well, that's like saying, look, people who are stupid should end up sort of evolving in a direction of a much shorter lifespan, certainly a shorter health span. A lot of
Yeah,
medical
well,
miracles can keep folks
the
alive
hope
who are
is
not healthy, right?
the hope is that those people do not survive long enough to reproduce, and consequently allow for progeny who will believe what they believe. And that's the whole basis of the survival of the fittest. The fittest survive to reproduce. The non-fittest do not.
And when you think about this, would you say that's precisely the way nature works, and it's just working that way all over again?
Well, evolution demands that that's correct. And all scientific observations support it.
But do you worry that there'll be people that say, well, in America, we're such a wealthy country that we should carry as many of the stragglers along? It's a little bit like no child left behind that exists in the school system, where the view is different learners are learning at different rates. And if people don't have health literacy, it's our responsibility as a government to drag them along, even if it's going to bring down the rest of the world's standard of living. We just have to do that sort of thing.
Well, I don't think it's a function of being rich or not being or being poor. I think that in general, we should support the survival of people who are unable to support themselves or who need help. But hopefully in the process, they will come to realize that if they disobeyed the rules and were or have succumbed to this virus or any other fatal disease, that the help that was provided to them will convince them of the errors of their ways. It's as simple as having people survive who understand the very simple principles of avoiding contagious diseases.
Right. But people will say things like, we vaccinate many children for lots of different viruses or lots of different potential problems. And we should now spend what sounds like is going to be billions, if not trillions, on a vaccination that might or might not work that well. But people think that's incumbent to happen, regardless of whether that same money might be more wisely used for other things, right?
Well, a vaccine is usually used by people who are both poor and rich, at least at some time in the use of a new vaccine. So that if the vaccine is successful, and we have yet to know that it is or will be, and I think that's surely a minimum of a year away. I have, in fact, produced the world's first poliomyelitis vaccine in a continuously propagable cell population, and that vaccine has been used worldwide. So I'm one of the few people who know what I'm talking about when it comes to developing a vaccine, because I've actually developed one and brought it from my laboratory to FDA approval. And it took a couple of years.
And that was probably when there was less red tape than there is now.
Well, I'm not aware of the red tape that exists today, but it seems to me that there's less red tape because of the degree of necessity that seems to be expressed in developing a vaccine to such a point that, like other elements of this disease, are incurring all kinds of shortcuts that are going to be dangerous. Referring to the so-called test kits that are used to test for the presence of the virus, and also for the now developing gamma globulin tests for neutralizing antibodies, and the ignorance surrounding statements made by, in particular, MDs, who the media have anointed as experts, is outrageous and indeed dangerous. These MDs may have had a single course, if they're lucky, in virology, and their knowledge of virology is primitive, which is so exasperating when I hear what many of these so-called experts, most of whom are physicians, say, that it's very dangerous to hear these statements. Of course, there are several well-known virologists who do make statements that are accurate, but there are very few of them that I see on the media.
I think you have the right perspective, because lots of people who talk to like medical doctors think that a MD means you know everything about everything, just like lawyers. We actually become very much specialists in particular areas. So an IP litigation attorney is very different than a trust and estates litigation attorney. Even though they both do litigation, they typically do it in different courts on different issues with different outcomes and different, I mean, some things are similar, but it's not at the level of comparison. I think that you're making the point that most MDs are just not trained to deal with viruses. I mean, they may get a very small exposure, but lots of them are learning a lot, but they're not experts yet. Most of them are not experts. Probably 99% are not experts, right?
Yes, of course. MDs treat diseases produced by viruses, but that doesn't mean that they understand the details that are part of being a virologist. The treatment of a disease does not make you an expert in the biology of the etiological agent of that disease. And you are correct in your analogy between physicians and lawyers. Each group is generally a specialist in some very narrow area in which they're qualified to voice expert opinion.
Right.
So that listening to physicians with no background in virology is dangerous. But physicians like to be known as popular advocates of medicine and enjoy the popularity of being quoted in the press or being seen on television. And this encourages a lot of false and dangerous information.
Right. Now, one thing you pointed out probably months ago when this televised stuff was going on with Fauci and Trump and Pence, you said those people are symbolically sending the wrong message regardless of what they say. And I'm paraphrasing you. You said, look how close they are standing to each other. They're going to get each other sick. And here we are now, finally, in the middle of May, or soon the middle of May. And it's exactly happened. I guess Fauci is being quarantined, and Birx is being quarantined, and Pence just came out of a quarantine, apparently. And I don't know whether Trump's being quarantined or not. Maybe they're hoping he'll be quarantined. But you predicted that. I want to say it was months ago, certainly weeks ago.
Well, a few hours ago, the White House is now masking everybody in the White House. Probably, although they haven't said this, I'm sure, with the exception of the president and probably his immediate family and Pence and his immediate family. So they face the Darwinian example and truths that I described earlier. Maybe they will suffer from this disease, and somehow learn of their errors.
So let's take a specific case. I actually have this case right now, and you could give me an insight of what you would think if you were trying to formulate a view about what to do. And I'll just keep it very generic. When you have a situation where a tenant has rented out, say, the 75th floor of a building in New York City, which we know New York City's got a big problem, and let's say there's 100 employees on that 75th floor, and they're saying, we don't want to get into the elevator going up to the 75th floor. We don't want to hike up the stairs. That's 75 flights of stairs. Probably would be great exercise, but we don't want to do that either. What do you say to that person about what they should do if they've rented the 75th floor and the landlord's saying, well, it's time to, pay the rent and use the 75th floor. All the equipment is there, all the other accoutrement of the business is there, but the employees don't want to go there because they're sincerely worried about getting in an elevator with other people who are sneezing or coughing.
Well, they do have the option, if they're working in an office building, to work at home. But if that's not possible, then the building management or the owners of the building need to apply sanitizing technology to that area and to the elevators, and to demand that people who use the elevators are masked, and perhaps allow only 2 or 3 people on an elevator at any one time. There are lots of measures that can be used to either suppress or eliminate the likelihood of encountering any virus.
But you can't keep 6 feet apart inside most elevators. Most elevators
you don't have to keep
6 feet.
You don't have to keep 6 feet apart. If you have 2 people in the elevator, that's sufficient if they're both masked to make almost certain that no contagious virus will be transmitted.
Well, I was hiking with a mask yesterday. It was sunny out, and we were hiking what I want to say was about 8 or 9 miles, a great hike. It probably took us at least 3 hours, maybe longer than that. And we encountered some other people on the hike, and the passage was actually narrow, and people were like, how do we pass back to back as opposed to pass face to face? And of course, the one side of the hike, you could fall off the side of the cliff if you took a step in the wrong direction. So it was an interesting thing. And I think people are genuinely worried, even with masks, that somehow there's sort of a certain degree of aura around your body in terms of the metabolic field, or what might be sort of your breath, that is, particularly in a hike, if you're sweating and the sweat is exuding from your body, as it was from mine, that even that kind of passage is risky, because somehow the sweat molecules will carry with them the coronavirus, and inadvertently what should be a nice outdoor activity turns into a death sentence. Is that an overstatement? Do you think of that as an overstatement? This, of course, is outdoors. There was no wind where we were, so it was pretty calm day, but the hiking passages were not going to enable 6 feet apart as people passed.
Well, you didn't say whether all of these hikers wore masks.
Yeah, everyone was wearing a mask.
Well, in that case, the probability, and we can only talk about probabilities in all of these cases, the probability is very low that a virus could pass between 2 people under those circumstances, especially if neither party sneezed or coughed.
Right, but if there's a lot of sweat on each body as it passes,
well, there's no evidence that this virus in any way is contagious through sweat.
Okay.
First of all, the virus replicates mostly in the respiratory tract. and not in skin, certainly not on the surface of skin. We have no evidence that that occurs, and I would doubt from my experience with viruses that it could occur. If the sun was out, the safety factor is even greater.
Okay, I'm with you on that. But let me
Because
add.
the UV that plays down on the surfaces of hikers is capable within several minutes of killing viruses.
No, I'm with you, but I want to add a factor. So mostly there were younger people on the hike, and I have to tell you, one of the things you discover as you get older, at least I can, is that I can smell marijuana a mile away. I just have a great nose for it. Now I'm decades from when I was in my teens, but I have a great smell for it. And a couple of these kids, they're probably still in their teens, but old enough, I guess, to buy legal marijuana, or maybe they're buying illegal marijuana, who knows? They stunk of marijuana. And I think one or two of them were actually puffing on marijuana as they were hiking. So if one of them puffed out a marijuana toke, or whatever it's called these days, back in my day it was called a toke, a toke, and that marijuana smoke ended up in my nostrils, could there have been delivery of coronavirus inadvertently to me in passing that guy as he toked on his pipe or cigarette?
Well, first of all, how can you smoke marijuana through a mask?
Oh, no, I agree. This kid was probably violating the mask rule. He had a marijuana cigarette hanging out of his mouth with the mask on his nose.
Well, that's different. But the molecules, the cannabis molecules, are orders of magnitude smaller than a virus. So that by smelling any odor, you're smelling things at a molecular level which is orders of magnitude smaller than a virus particle.
Well, that's news to me. I thought it was the opposite. I thought the virus was smaller than the molecule of the...
No, a virus particle consists of thousands of molecules, maybe more than thousands of molecules, so that they're orders of magnitude bigger than any odor molecule that you could smell, cannabis or otherwise.
Right, but cannabis gives off a scent that I think most people who...
Regardless of the scent, it could be garlic, it could be smoke, which is a different matter entirely, but odors consist of many molecules that individually travel to your olfactory bulbs.
Right.
And unlike viruses, are orders of magnitude smaller than viruses. A virus particle, and you've seen pictures, I'm sure, because the pictures have the artist's renditions of the pictures of a coronavirus have been all over the place.
Right. It's very well known now. Yes.
The spikes consist of many hundreds of molecules. The outer shell does also. The nucleus also. The RNA, the nucleic acid consists of thousands of molecules. So we're talking about a blue whale, which would be comparable to the virus particle, compared to an ant.
So you would say, look, if you look at a picture, which I'll put up right now, of coronavirus, I'm going to put that up right now on the screen. You would say, looking at a typical picture, and there's lots of them, I put an entire array, and maybe we should do this one that's a government picture. This is the COVID-19 from CDC online newsroom. If you're looking at a picture like this and you're blowing it up, as I'm now doing, you'd say, that is a picture of something that is actually far bigger than the cannabis picture. I'm going to see if I can find
Well,
it.
those photos are artists' renditions. No virus particle is colored the way those are artists' renditions appear.
Okay, so what should we be looking for that's more of an atomic force microscope kind?
You need to look at an electron microscopic view of a coronavirus.
Okay, do you think
And
this Harvard picture is more correct?
I don't see that on any of the photos that you've displayed.
Okay, but you would say it would be more like a black and white picture, something that's more like this, or would you say these are all illustrations that are drawn
They look
based
like
on some
illustrations.
artist view?
The electron microscope gives you a grayscale, and not a black or white, but a grayscale.
Okay.
And I've not seen.
A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people would probably say, "Oh yeah, you're looking at a picture right there, and that's what it looks like." And
No,
you're saying, "No, that's not correct at all."
It's impossible for that to be an actual virus particle.
Because?
First of all, it's colored. Virus particles are not colored. Secondly,
Right.
They're far too distinct.
Are we getting closer now as I look at something like that?
Now we're getting close. And I don't know the details of those photos and what the captions for them say, but the grayscale ones look more typical. That looks more typical. That one does look more typical.
Right. This is a coronavirus viewed under an electron microscope, right, courtesy of the CDC.
That exactly tells you what I said. There's no color. There's no definitive, discrete outlines of the parts of the particle, especially the attachment features. They're blurred, which is the way they should be on an electron microscope. And you have to remember that the particle is 3 dimensions. And that's about the best you can do. You can do better than that photo, but for our discussion, it's not necessary.
Right, but you're saying if we were to look at cannabis in comparison, it would be much tinier if you had some cannabis right there next to it. Is that a fair statement?
If you had a cannabis molecule on that photo, you wouldn't be able to see it.
Oh, because you're saying this is like looking at a quarter, like an American U.S. quarter of a dollar in four of them here. And if you were looking at something that was cannabis, it would be like a pinpoint on a top of a pin comparatively?
It would not be, you couldn't resolve it. The resolution is not strong enough to even see a single cannabis molecule or a cluster of them or a group of them.
So it's kind of interesting that people probably don't even realize that. When you're dealing with something like a cannabis image, I'm just going to see if I can find one. Probably it's all artist renditions as well, right? Cannabis images.
I doubt that you can see. Well, let me put it this way. It is very difficult to see a single molecule under a light microscope. And even under an electron microscope, you cannot see a single molecule.
Well, this is what they're saying. A scanning electron microscope would show, for what they're saying is marijuana, through the Rochester Institute of Technology.
Well, I don't know the magnification. Do they state the magnification? That's essential.
Let's look at what they say here quickly, because this opened a new door to me and something I never really thought of before. So let's see if we can. Of course, we have to listen to the ad first. That's unfortunate. We have to get past the ad. I guess it's an appropriate ad for appropriate time. But I think what you're saying, if I could paraphrase, Len, is that
They're looking at a microscopic view of the surface of a leaf or the surface of a bud.
right,
You're not looking at a cannabis molecule.
right. But even this, which you would say is a hugely bigger picture, even it would be much smaller than what you would find for coronavirus?
Well, it's a difference between a molecule and an entity like a virus. A molecule of cannabis or 100 molecules of a cannabis, of cannabis odor, and a coronavirus, which I state again and again, is orders of magnitude, 10,000, 100,000, millions of times larger than a cannabis molecule or any other molecule.
Right. So we would have to find, and maybe I will in some future discussion, find the right places to compare. But your point is that, look, if that hiker is smoking marijuana and exuding smoke through his mask or through a side of his mask or however he's doing it, he is not very likely also delivering with that puff of smoke a coronavirus. He's delivering a bunch of molecules that, yes, are probably not great for me to have a secondhand smoke. But the reality is it's not necessarily a delivery system for coronavirus.
Well, another point that I have yet to make, but I'll make it now, is that we have no data that speaks to the possibility, and it's a possibility, that cannabis smoke is virucidal.
Okay. You don't know one way or the other whether it's going to aid the virus or kill the virus, right?
Well, it can't aid it. It can only kill it, or it's either virucidal or virustatic.
Wow, that's kind of interesting, because I would imagine that someone would study that and then claim maybe people should be actually starting to smoke marijuana. I know people who say they are taking shots of bourbon at night, 2 shots, on the view that they're somehow clearing out their system with the bourbon.
It would require a controlled experiment to determine the truth of that possibility. And I have no information on that point whatsoever.
Okay. Well, we're running out of time, and it's because I got started late with you, but I do have other questions which maybe we could preserve for some additional time this week. I'll send you a schedule. I think this little exploration of what the electron microscopes reveal is quite helpful, and I don't think the news media have done a good job of even that, to be honest, Len.
Well, that's not the only thing that the news media has failed to convey. There are a lot of other things that they've failed to convey that have misled people.
Right. Thanks for your time this afternoon. I look forward to our next session together.
Sure.
You've been great. I really appreciate it, Len. Bye-bye.
Nice talking to you.
Sure. Bye-bye.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.